Hello guys. Today I want to talk about YUI within Mojito. And since YUI developers are usually control freaks, they want to know exactly what's going on and how YUI is working on that browser or on that device, and um, how to control how YUI behave under different conditions, and more important, to be able to do some performance tuning and some performance optimization at the low level. So is 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 basically an important topic for me, and I think it's good to know how you can actually control that through Mojito, considering that Mojito is already doing part of the job. Mojito is setting up the YY instance on the client side for you. Mojito is so setting up the default configuration for that instance and so on. So how you can get your hands into it and control it. So that's the kind of things that we'll cover today. Let's start with pretty basic application. So I'm running the latest version of Mojito, Mojito version 4, like 0.4, and let's create this boilerplate to start playing around with the configuration. So Mojito create application called YUI config. Let's get into that folder. Now the boilerplate. Now mojits. Let's create one mojit. Mojito create mojit. Let's call it foo and copy it up. And at this point, we have everything we really need for this example, for this screencast. So let's get Sublime ready. Okay, it's not needed. All right. So let's do quick configuration to not waste time on the Mojito side, getting directly into what we need. So let's create a route for this application, and let's have a single URL for it. The verb will be route get. The path for this will be the default path slash, and then it will basically call one instance called page and the index for that page. And then let's create that instance to start with. So this is the default configuration application. In that spec we can define the instances, mojit instances. So let's start with that one, page, that we just used there. And this one, let's define the type, which is the most important field here. And let's use the default HTML frame mojit provided by Mojito out of the box. And this frame, this mojit is just the one responsible for creating the HTML for the page, like the header, body, and all that. And then within this one, you can have multiple mojits. And let's start with one mojit. So let's create this configuration for this instance. And this configuration will have obviously a child, and this child will have a base instance, and this base instance will be called foo. So let's create that instance here. The instance definition is the same principle. So we have this foo and has a specific type, and the type of foo will be the foo in capital, which is the name of the folder that you have here that has a module within. So this is pretty basic configuration, nothing fancy here. So if we get this application running, Mojito start, we should be getting this page. Get into the browser, basic page should come up. Here it is. Let's check the source of this. The source is just simple. There's nothing in that other than the, as I described, the HTML, and then the module within that body, and this module is the default one created by Mojito when you do Mojito create module. So there's nothing weird here, but there is no YUI yet in the client side. There is no Mojito running on the client side. So to do that, the setting is the regular one. So you have to add a setting here saying, by the way, this frame module should deploy Mojito. So for that, you do deploy, and you want to deploy Mojito to the client side. That's about it. We're starting this thing, and you should get now a lot of content here. You can see here there is a YUI requirement, so all the requirements from the YUI that will be running on that client side, which include Mojito application running on the client side, and after that you have a bunch of Mojito related code. Then you have your foo binder, which is created by default as well, and then you have a few more things that you need. And finally, you have the YUI configuration created by Mojito by default. And then you have the instantiation process for the YUI that will be running on that page. And as you see here, is using the wildcard, which means that all the requirements are already loaded up front for you. Mojito is doing that computation, generating everything that is needed in between the YUI and the Mojito related content plus your content. So it is assuming that there's no need to load the loader and load more content over the network, or do computation to load more specific modules over the network. So that's kind of an optimization, but sometimes is for some kind of application this is not needed, and you have the ability to change this behavior, and that's what we want to cover today. So let's start with the basic configuration. And by the way, don't worry about all these things here, like a bunch of different files. Checker can do the optimization before you push to production. That's just the standard way to optimize all this in a very easy way during the build process. So let's get into the basic configuration before getting into the YUI configuration. So Mojito already provides a set of configuration that you can go and configure, and everything that is configurable in Mojito should happen here in the application.json at the application level. So the first thing that I want to cover is the logs. So you get back to the browser and you reload this page, and we get the inspector ready. You probably will see a lot of console logs statement there. This is default YUI plus a Mojito logger, or all then just flushing statements into the console log. So you sometimes you want to get better configuration to focus on specific areas of your application. The same happens in the server side. Whenever your application is running, you have a lot of console logs, and you also want to configure this from time to time. So the first thing is to get the logs settings. So getting back to the code, you have the ability to define here log as configuration, and and in this configuration you have two main groups: client to configure whatever happens in the logs in the client, and then you also have the server. Okay, and there are two main configurations here: level, which is the level of log that you want, and for now let's just use debug. And then you have also the YUI for YUI modules, and what you want to lock YUI or not. And let's say true. Yeah, I want to have those two there in the client and in the server side, and the same for a client. So let's use the same configuration for now. We'll get into more details about this. But this is just a sugar layer on top of the regular YUI configuration that you can also control. So this is true here. Okay. And obviously for production you use a different configuration, and we will cover that. So that doesn't change much of what we have. This basically tells that whenever something happens in YUI on the server, on the client, just log it and print it out so we can get more information about it. Let's save here. Let's just restart the server. Should pretty much behave the same and the same in the client side. Whenever you reload this thing, will give you pretty much a little bit more because now you have a higher level, but in general that's what you get by default. So that's the first setting, and we will get into more details about how to optimize this whenever you go to production and so on. The other setting that I want to start with is the YUI setting, and this is the important one for today. So there is this setting that tells you what's the YUI configuration that you want to use, and the first thing that you probably want to look into, and this configuration doesn't correlate with the YUI config that you have in the YUI documentation just yet. We'll get to that, but the first thing that you can configure here is what we call in Mojito dependency calculation. So dependency calculations, and this pretty much defines how Mojito will compute YUI dependencies for the client side. And by default, we have this predefined value for now, which is pre-computed. And pre-computed means that Mojito will try to figure out what are all the dependencies that you need. It will flush it to the client side, and it will use the wildcard to initialize YUI in the client side, so there's no need to get the loader and so on. And the reason behind that is when you create an application that you're going to ship to the App Store or you're going to bundle with the app, it's just easier to have that kind of configuration. You don't need to do computation. You have all the requirements locally, so it's easier. And remember that Mojito was created for mobile apps, so that's the default configuration. But there are a few other configurations that you can use depending on the application, the type of application that you're using. So this is the default. This is what we're getting today. The other option that you have is to say, I don't want Mojito to do anything about computation. I will load on demand. And this is what we usually use in YUI. For those that are YUI developers, this is more familiar to what we do in YUI. So basically, if we restart the server, we get to that page again. You will see that now things will change a little bit. Refreshing this, you get a little bit of a bootstrap extended to have the basic YUI stuff, and then down here you have this YUI use statement that no longer use the wildcard. Now we use Mojito client, and Mojito client is more specific, which means that now you have to do computation. So in the initial, this is the old version of it. You see that we are actually executing directly the two requirements, and then after that all the Mojito stuff, and there is nothing here that tells you that we are loading the loader. Now if you refresh this page, things are a little bit different. Now we do have default provided by Mojito, all the Mojito stuff, and then down here you should see a loader call, and then after that the requirements that are needed, and then after that the initialization will get executed. So now everything is load on demand depending on the requirement for each of the modules that you have in the page. So things are a little bit more a la web style, usually what we do in YUI. So that's the first setting. But obviously you have now the penalty of having this computation that happens in the client side. Sometimes that computation could be very expensive. So we came up with this idea of having something like pre-computed plus on demand. And this is more likely to work everywhere. So Mojito is creating this predefined or pre-compute requirements, send them to the client side, and then based on the browser that you're running, YUI will go and do the computation for whatever is needed for that particular um, browser or that particular device, using what we call the feature detection and so on. And this is the recommended setting, in my opinion. It's easier to have that, to guarantee that if you run this application into i7, for example, or i8, it will go and fetch those pieces that are needed for those specific browsers. So now if we save this and we refresh the application, you will see that now the requirement should be a little bit bigger, the same that we have at the beginning, and now the configuration is still Mojito client, which means that there will be some computation that will happen. And as I said, this is the recommended setting, in my opinion. This is the best you can get for applications that are meant to run over the network. If you want to ship to the App Store, having the application as part of the app bundle, you can use the default setting. But that's not all. So on top of that, as you can see here, I showed you already, but you have this default configuration, YUI configuration, that's produced by Mojito. And this is the one that we are used to use. So this is the one that we want to sometimes configure and optimize and so on. So let's look how can we do that. It's the same principle. You get into the YUI settings and then you get into this config here. So YUI config will give you the full settings that we ship to the client side. And what we can have here, remember, whatever you pass into that setting, it will go into the client side. So let's put something here, something like that, and it will just be part of that configuration, which means that, let's restart this thing. Now we'll have an extended YUI config. So now you see my foo and bar is already there, which means that whatever you see here in the YUI config documentation, you can use it through Mojito. There's nothing that prevents you to do that. So you have the ability to configure whatever you want. So that's one thing. Obviously, another details about Mojito is that it does this pre-computation. It does it automatically. So if I want to introduce, this is my binder for the only mojit that I have deployed into that page, and I have these basic requirements, and now I want to add a new requirement saying autocomplete. I want to get the autocomplete because this mojit will use it somehow. So if you get into that page now, it does the pre-computation, which means that now autocomplete should be part of this. You see it actually get bigger, and you see it's split it into two big files. You know the limitations on some browsers and some internet providers, so it's better to have these URLs cut into specific sites so they don't fail to load over the network. So that kind of things Mojito is already doing it automatically for you. And yeah, and obviously you see I did nothing. I just add the requirement into my mojit and automatically will be pull it into the client side of the client that requires it. That's pretty good. So, but for example, to give you more details about how this configuration works, if you look into autocomplete, you will see that there are a bunch of things that have been loaded for autocomplete, including the language, for example. And I might have to use my own language definition. I don't want to use the autocomplete default definition from YUI, for example. And I can easily do that. And since Mojito is already computing this, I should have the ability to set up my YUI to not load that thing. So for that you can use the regular setting in YUI. Like for example, you do ignore, and then you tell what are the YUI modules that you don't want to load. In this case, I don't want to load the language definition for autocomplete. Oops, autocomplete, and is the list English, I guess, because I have my own definition, and I don't want to use the default one. That's that kind of things. So you save this thing, restart. Now that setting should be propagated into this. You see, it's gone. Now autocomplete doesn't have the language definition anymore because it's excluded from the computation that Mojito will do up front. So that's the kind of things that you can do here. Now let's get into more details about development versus production, and Mojito is very good at it. So as you see, I'm just changing the settings for the master settings, how we call it. But this only gets reflected for any request that comes in. I only wanted to use some of these settings for development only, and then using a different settings for production. So the easy way to do that is basically, as you can see here, by default, Mojito will give you this specific setting for environment development. So whenever you're running on development, you can put your settings down there, and they will not affect production traffic, and that's pretty good. So what we can do is, obviously these locks can also be moved into that development and have a different lock level for production and development. So what I recommend for production is pretty much saying none. So don't report anything, and do false here. Actually, to be specific, I would like to get errors on the server side, so I can collect errors that happens in the server side on my application. But on the client side, I want none of that, and that will pretty much help me to avoid the user seeing errors on the client side. And in the server, I don't want to get any YUI related stuff. I just want to get errors and errors. And then for this development, you can still use debug. So that's the way it should be. My recommendation for production application. So that's the way to do it. But now, how this application will use development or production, it all depends on how you boot your application. So an easy way to do this is by saying, I want to execute this, but I want to pass specific context. And this context will be saying the same that we get here. Oops. So we can copy this. We can, oops. And now our application is running on environment development, which means that it will use the settings that are defined down here, and they will have priority on top of those that are defined here. So it pretty much match all this into, or merge all this into a unique setting for that particular environment. And the real way to solve this in production is by changing the server.javascript. I will be talking about that in a different training. So those are the basic setting, but for YUI it's the same thing. For YUI, for example, you can have specific settings for development, and those are some of the ones that I recommend. So let me put it there. So obviously dependency calculations will be only on the master because the way that your application behaves. But you can have, for example, if you're running a mobile device, this one is a sugar layer for the console. So you can have console in client, in client, and this is pretty useful when you are running on iPhone, iPad, stuff like that, because basically allow you to have these specific settings. So let me load this page here. Should get the nice console that you don't have in iOS or in iPad or whatever. So you have even the filters here. So it's already predefined for you. You don't need to deal with all that. You just put that setting there. It will work. Remember to put it only on development settings because it's only for development. Other settings like, for example, obviously ignore should be also at the top. This foo is not needed anymore, so let's remove it. And let's say I want to, for example, use this other setting that is very useful for development, like throw all the errors, so I can get them in the console whenever they happen. I can even filter what are the kind of logs that I want. So I want to exclude. I'm getting a lot of probably a lot of errors for modules like node. Then the node reports a lot of them. Maybe selector reports a lot of them, so I want to exclude them. Stuff like that. You can also do it here. Like for example, if you look into the console here, you will see you have attribute events, so I don't want to get any attribute there. So I can just add it here saying for development don't put any attribute related log. I don't care about those. Stuff like that. They're very useful for this kind of development, debugging, and so on. So should refresh here. It should not come in the console. You see it disappear from here, so you don't have to deal with that. So that's the kind of settings that you have, and obviously when you look into the source, these settings will end up in the client side right here. You see all the settings that you pass, and they will be automatically piped into any YUI instance that you create in the client side. So that's the kind of things that you can do with Mojito, and hopefully you will like it and you will try. And I will be sharing this example in GitHub. So that's pretty much it. Thanks.